Good evening and welcome. Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? I'm Lee Love, and this is Photo Mentor TV. If this is your first time here, we're thrilled to have you tonight. Of course, this is our little celebration, obviously, for Halloween. Don't usually do too much. I used to, actually. You guys wouldn't be surprised, probably. I used to have a huge Halloween display that I made all... Anyway, I won't go into it, but it was pretty cool. Had about 300 people come by, including the police. But of course, they loved it. They were just driving by to see what was going on. They weren't there to hassle me. But anyway, I'm glad you could join us tonight. Again, Photo Mentor TV. Tonight we are doing something kind of cool. I think you guys are going to enjoy this. It's going to be about how to photograph the moon. I thought it was probably appropriate to do something like that, being it is Halloween, and last week was a full moon on the 20th, so I drug out some gear and did some photos, and I'm going to show you those and go through some steps and kind of teach you some tips and techniques and some stuff like that. Hopefully, it will help you guys. Again, if you we're not streaming on Facebook right now, but we are on YouTube and live. If you want to join us, of course, then of course you wouldn't be hearing this, I guess, if you weren't on YouTube, would you? But I encourage you to, ask questions if you want. And let's see what's going on here. Try again. Oh, okay. Anyway, and to ask questions, put your comments in the YouTube comment section, and myself or Sue Ann will answer them and help you guys out. Love to have all kinds of questions. Anything you want to ask, you're welcome to ask, and I'll do my best to answer it. So anyway, looks like something's not working right here, but what's new? So anyway, my little display there with the skull and all of that, that was one of those crazy, I put that together in about 15 minutes, and I came up with the idea in the shower. I was like, oh, I could do this and I could do that. So, and the crazy thing is I have all this stuff to do something really more, a lot more sophisticated, but I ran out of time. So anyway. So again, tonight we're going to talk about photographing the moon from a lot of different perspectives, and I think you guys will enjoy this. So I guess let's go ahead and get started here. No sense in delaying this. The first thing we're going to talk about, let's see here. I think this is where am I at? Yep. Okay. So we're going to talk about, these are the kind of the four categories I'm going to break down for you. One would be finding the moon, because that's kind of important, understanding its phases and that type of thing, when the best time to photograph the moon is. Also some apps that'll help you do that. What equipment you're going to need, which luckily is not a lot. And I'm going to go through some settings. I'm going to have a video I shot of myself out trying to do the same thing. And so in the middle of my front yard, which was kind of interesting. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But so I know my neighbors think I'm crazy. They must. I mean, so anyway, because I'm out there with lights and video equipment and all this crazy stuff. So I'll go over those settings with you, and then we'll go over some of the techniques you can use, meaning like more of the creative aspect of photographing the moon. Because, it's interesting, one of the reasons I decided to do this topic was I see a lot of people posting questions or samples or problems they're having on a lot of Facebook groups. So I figured, because you guys are having, I see it so frequently, that of course it's probably something that you want to know more about. So I figured this would be a good one here. So, okay. So first thing, let's talk about apps and some of that kind of stuff, and what you can use to try and help locate the moon and some thing, and why you even want to do that to begin with, because I mean, you'd think, oh, I just can look up in the sky. I don't need to really an app or anything like that. But there's a little more to it than that, and so I want to get into a little more detail. So, one of the reasons is you want to be able to determine the elevation and the azimuth. You want to be able to predict that. So, if you can't predict it, you don't know where you need to be at what time and that type of thing. So it's important that you understand, if it's cloudy or whatever at your specific location, what is the elevation going to be, for example? Where is it going to be? And I'll talk a little more about that in detail. The other thing is you may want to know what phase of the moon it's in. Is it a full moon? Is it a quarter moon? Is it a harvest moon? Whatever that may, there's all kinds of different phases of the moon, and depending on what you're trying to capture, you're going to want to be able to predict that as well. And of course, the right night. I mean, where you're going to, you want to be at the right place at the right time, instead of running around trying to figure what this thing is going to be, where it's going to be. So, for example, this picture right here is one of mine, and this is somewhat unique in that I think I looked at the metadata. This was taken on September 28th, I think. But what happens is there's a specific time of year, right around end of September, beginning of October, when the moon comes up right, and you have a shot of all three monuments. Obviously the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Capitol. And so if you don't know where to be and how to line up for this, then it's kind of a problem. So that's why I'm saying that an app is very helpful in that. So one of the ones that I like, this is called Photo Ephemeris, or Photographer's Ephemeris. And it doesn't look like much here. I'll show you. I'll play it here. So it's a pretty neat app. I use it on my iPhone, but it's also, apparently, I just found out, available on your laptop as a web application. And the cool thing about it is that you put in exactly your location, where you're going to be, what time of day, and it'll tell you exactly where the sun's going to be, where the moon's going to be, where it's going to come up over the horizon. And so it takes a lot of the guesswork out of trying to figure out. I use this a lot for commercial photography. So if I'm doing a client a project outdoors, and I know I'm going to be doing it a certain time of day, I want to know where the sun's going to be, so I know where to set up, where my lighting needs to be, all of this kind of stuff. And so it's very, very helpful in being able to predict what's going to happen and when. Let's see, this one is, so there's a URL here somewhere. It's called, I think it's called Photo Ephemeris / here, let's see here. I forget. Yeah, there it is. So it's app.photoephemeris.com. Subscribe. Now, apparently it's also free if you don't use the free version, or the pro version, I mean. And the app is, I think it's $9, $12, something like that. I forget. It's been a long time, but it's a really cool application, and I recommend that you start with this one, or at least look at it. There's a lot of them out there, but the point is that you want something to use to be able to predict where the moon's going to be at a specific time. So anyway. The next thing, of course, is having the right equipment. Now, you're going to need a camera. You don't need a telescope, although if you have one, I've seen people that actually photograph the moon with the telescope and their iPhone. There's a little plastic bracket you can get that'll go over the eyepiece, and you can actually photograph it with your iPhone. So anyway, but I highly recommend a tripod. And I don't recommend you get a cheap one. Okay, like here's one for $16. Now, I totally understand because we've all been through that. Okay, I'm the same thing. It's like, well, I don't really need an expensive tripod. I'm not going to use it that often. I'm not going to carry it around, etc., etc. Well, here's what happens. Number one, if you have a cheap tripod, there's a good chance that your camera will not stay on it. Either the plate will fall off, the tripod will fall over, or whatever. And so I've just seen this too many times. So what happens, you spend, I don't know, $1,000, $500 on a camera, you add a lens to it, etc., and then you get this $16 tripod, which falls over, and now you're talking about a $450 repair on your camera or your lens. So it's really not worth it. I'm speaking from experience. I haven't had mine fall over, but I've gone through about 3 or 4 tripods like most of us do, and we start off with a cheap one because we don't think we're going to use it very often. And then you realize you need something a little better, and so you upgrade, and then you upgrade. And then finally what happens is you end up with a good tripod, and you then never have to buy one again. And so that's really what I end up doing. Now, you don't need to spend $1,500 on a tripod, but you ought to spend at least, I think you can get into something like a pretty good one for, $200, $300 maybe at the most. I mean, you can spend more, of course, but you don't need to. The other thing is, I recommend that you get one that will handle at least double the weight of your camera. Now, your camera's not very heavy, but see, the problem is you don't know what lenses you're going to own in the future. So maybe your camera weighs less than a pound now, but if you start doing wildlife photography or something like photographing the moon, and you may invest in a longer lens, and then the tripod you have is not going to hold it. So you're going to end up replacing it anyway. So go ahead and bite the bullet, get a really good one. As much as you can afford. The one here that I'm showing is a Getzo. These are really expensive. This one's probably about $500. It's all carbon fiber. You don't need anything like that, but you should. There's another brand called Benro, which is a good brand, and there's another brand called Sirui, Sirui, and that's also, I think, a good one. I've used those, and they seem to offer a pretty good value for the money. There's both. You're going to find what's going to change the price significantly is what it's made of. If it's carbon fiber, it's at least going to be $100 more as opposed to aluminum. And here's the thing though, if you live in an area where it gets cold, then what happens is you're out and you're working on, and you have this aluminum tripod. You grab a hold of that thing, and it's freezing cold because it's been in the trunk of your car. So the carbon fiber is actually absorbs more of the vibration, and it's lighter, generally about at least a pound lighter, depending on the tripod. So anyway, invest in a good tripod if you can. It'll save you, and it'll be one of those things that you'll be glad you did in the long run. Okay, so a lens. So now you don't need a long lens. I'm going to show you a couple different choices. In fact, the photos I'm going to show you tonight, I shot with a 200 millimeter lens, a 70 to 200 millimeter. So it wasn't even that long. It was actually too short. But if you want to invest in a lens, a couple you could look at if you're a Nikon shooter would be the 200 to 500. It's a really, really good lens. It's amazingly sharp. And believe it or not, it's fairly light compared to some of the other lenses that are out there. It runs, I don't know what the U.S. price runs around $1,400. No, I don't really see it on sale very often. I don't ever. But you could rent it and try it out then see what you think. But it's if you're a Nikon shooter, it's a spectacular lens, and I think you'd like it. If you're not a Nikon shooter, then you might want to look at the Sigma 150 to 600. This is also another lens I've shot with. Great lens, great for wildlife. It's kind of the go-to lens for birding, wildlife photography. Both Sigma makes one in this same focal length, and also Tamron, and both of them are good lenses. They're not the fastest lenses in the world. They're 5.6 at 150 millimeter and 6.3 at 600 millimeter, which is one nice thing about the Nikon. If you shoot Nikon, it's a 5.6 throughout, but that's not that big of a deal. It's not that much of a difference. But if you can't go that route, this lens right here runs about $1,000, $1,049, I think. But I see it on sale quite often for $950, $800 and something. So again, that's a lot of money, I understand, but not. There's only one way you can make up focal length, and that's with glass. And so when you compare this to what a 400 millimeter f2.8 would be, for example, see people on the sidelines, these NFL games shooting, those lenses run anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 to $9,000. So when you look at that, this is pretty reasonable compared to. So it's all relative. The other lens you could look at, Tamron came out with this lens about maybe about a year ago now, and it's a 18 to 400 millimeter lens. It's meant for a crop sensor camera. It's available in multiple mounts. You can get it for Canon, Nikon, Sony, and it's a nice lens because it's a single, you know, if you want what I call carry around lens, you're traveling, this one lens is all you need because it'll do relatively wide angle to telephoto. Now again, it's not the fastest lens in the bag. It's, you know, I think a 3.5, 5.6 to 6.3 when you're zoomed all the way in, but that's just the nature of the beast. But it's also only about $649 when it's not on sale. So, but to have one lens that's 18 to 400 is a pretty big deal, because that it wasn't that long ago you couldn't do that. If there was a breaking point at 300 millimeter, a lot of people have like a 70 to 300, things like that. To go to or 55 to 300 as a kit lens, to go past 300, you had to go to a whole nother category of lens, much more expensive, and so this kind of broke that mold. And so anyway, it's just an option for you if you're looking for a lens. But again, you can crop in if you have the megapixels to do it without losing too much quality if you shoot in a RAW or a high resolution format. The other thing I recommend you look into is a shutter release. So you want to be able to trigger the camera without touching it. So that's what a shutter release cable does. Plugs into the side of the camera. Sometimes there's a USB model. Sometimes they plug into a special remote port. There's even some that are infrared, but those are kind of, you don't really want to use that because they generally have to be in front of the camera. They're meant as a self photo kind of a thing, a selfie kind of a thing. So, and these are not expensive. They don't have to spend a lot of money on this, but this prevents you from having to touch the camera, and the reason is because you get camera shake when you do that. And so this is something you might want to look at to get a sharp image as possible as well. And the other thing a lot of people don't realize is you can also use the self-timer mode to do the same thing. If you don't have a shutter release, just set up your camera, get it all ready, switch it over to timer mode, and then push the button and stand back, and it'll count down, and then it'll photograph and take the photo by itself when you're not touching it. So this is kind of a good way to solve the same problem if you're in a jam. Some cameras nowadays will work with iPhone or smartphone apps that you can trigger them. That would also work as well. Let me see. There's something I don't think I mentioned here. Let me see. No, I don't have it in here. And that is that you can also might want to consider locking up the mirror. In other words, if you're on a DSLR, what happens is when you push that shutter, there's a mirror there. It flips up out of the way, exposes the sensor, and takes the picture. Well, sometimes if you're now mainly when you're using a really really slow shutter speed is where this happens. If you have a relatively fast shutter speed, it's not as big a deal. But if you're doing a long exposure, then you want to lock that mirror up. So what happens is there's a setting on your camera, if it's a DSLR, that will let you lock the mirror up, and then you can take the picture. So that will, what you do is you lock that mirror up first, you let it settle a few seconds, and then you take the picture using the self timer or the shutter release, and that'll also give you a sharper image because now there's no movement. Especially if you're on one of those cheap tripods, because those will pick up any movement. And so if you don't have a very steady platform, then you're going to want to do something like this as well. Okay. Trying to see if we got so trying to see if we have any questions here. Sorry. Nope. Okay. All right. So so self-timer. The other thing you might want to invest in, might want to consider, this is a luxury, of course, would be a flashlight. And if you can, get one with a red gel or a red cover that goes over the front of it for using. Because what happens is, and that if you can't see, it's a picture of a cockpit there, and like a pilot, because that's why they use red lighting in the cockpit, because it doesn't affect your eyesight, your light. So when you flip on a regular flashlight, it's really bright. Your eyes have to adjust. Your irises and your lens and your eyes go down and close down, and it just affects your vision. So here, if you have use a red flashlight, then you can still see, find stuff in your bag, which is hard to find at night, and also look at the back of your camera or the settings on your camera, make an adjustment. So this is kind of this is just something I threw in because I discovered, forgot about this myself, and then when I was doing the shoot here, I'm going to show you in a minute, it would have been nice to have. So just kind of a bonus. Okay, let's talk about settings. So in settings, we're going to go over a bunch of things. I'm going to go over, but before I do that, what I will do first is I will show you. Let's see here. Yeah. So let me let you watch this first, and this will be, and this will explain a lot of it to you, I hope, and then I'll come back, and it's not very long, and then I'll answer some questions, or I'll give you more detail on this.
The problem with photographing the moon is it's a very bright object, and it's against a very black sky, of course. And so what happens is the light meter sees all that black, and it tries to raise the exposure, thinking that the image is underexposed. So what you need to do is you need to compensate by that. So you have to override what the camera thinks it is, and I'll show you how to do that. So the first thing I'd like to do is just do a test shot, just to kind of find out where I am. So because most people are using lenses that are maybe a kit lens or something like that, which is typically the fastest shutter speeds of 4.5 or 5.6. I've gone to shutter priority, and I put in f4.5, and my ISO is 250. I'll let the camera figure out what it thinks it needs to be for that shot right there. So let's frame this up. Do a test. Okay. So that's actually not too bad. It's pretty close. So let's see what the camera thought that was. So if we look at the EXIF data, the camera shot that on 1/800th of a second at 4.5 at ISO 250. Now, it was still a little overexposed, okay? So what we're going to do now, we're going to take those same settings and we're going to put them into the camera in manual mode. So we go to manual mode, okay, and we're going to dial in 1/800th of a second, 4.5, 250. So that should give us the exact same image, except we don't want that same image. We want something a little better than that, so a little underexposed. So therefore, a couple of ways you could do that. I recommend what you do is you change your, on this particular case, because we got a nice fast shutter speed, I would change the aperture. So I would go to like 5.6. Do a test shot, see what that looks like. There we go. So that looks pretty good. I think I could probably live with that, but I might want to make it a little darker. So what I would do is I recommend bracketing. In other words, try a couple exposures over and a couple exposures under if you want. So first thing we do, so I'm 5.6. We're going to change that to 6.3. We'll do a shot. We'll do a shot at 7.1, and we'll do a shot at 8, f8. And we'll look at those. Shot at f8 actually looks pretty good.
Okay, so what happened there is it said, I said f8, but what I realized when I was looking at it was that it really, the right exposure was f9.0. So, so let me explain something here. I want to make sure you guys understand what I was talking about. Because the shutter speed was okay, so what I did first is I came out, I put it on shutter priority. In other words, I let the camera figure out what shutter speed it wanted to be. Put the aperture again, we just were kind of review on 4.5. ISO didn't need to be that high because the moon is really bright. Okay, 250 was probably a little too much. But anyway, took a shot, and the camera, the light meter said, okay, that's a great thing, but it still needs to, it needs to be at what am I trying to say here? It said it still needs to be at 800th of a second. So in other words, it was still too bright. So because it said it was 800th of a second, I could have, if I wanted to make the image darker, in other words, make a little better exposure, I could have lowered the ISO from 250 to 125 or something, or I could have raised the shutter speed. Well, because the shutter speed was pretty good at itself at 800th of a second, I didn't need to do that. Now, and so I decided to go with a smaller aperture. Now, if it would have been the opposite, let's say the lens would have been open or it had been at f8 and this exposure, maybe I was shooting on aperture or shutter aperture priority or automatic, and the camera came back and said, hey, you need, and it came back and said 30th of a second at f11, for example. I would not have shot at that, and the reason is you don't want to have a super slow shutter speed, so I wanted to adjust that. So what I would do is open the lens up and to get more light in, but speed up the shutter, so therefore I'm not shooting at such a slow shutter speed where I'm going to get a vibration. So again, to review what this one here said, because it came back and said, oh, 800th of a second, there's plenty of shutter speed there. It's going to give a nice sharp image. So what I decided to do then was use the aperture as the variable to change the exposure. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, one of the other reasons I decided to do that is because I was shooting at 4. Now, the lens I was shooting at was not fair because it's a 70 to 200 2.8. And it's a very good lens. It's very sharp. So it's sharp at 2.8. But for most lenses, they're not their best wide open. So you really want to shoot, especially something like the moon, where you maybe are going to be cropping because you don't have the focal length, or you just need that really sharpness. You want to be in the middle range of the lens anyway. Okay? So, in fact, that's kind of what I'm talking about here, I guess. So you kind of want to be in the middle range of the aperture anyway. So instead of shooting at 4.5, I could have made other adjustments. I could have, again, made adjustments, kept the aperture at 4.5 and made adjustments in the ISO or the shutter speed. But I didn't want to do that. I want to shoot more. I want to keep that fast shutter speed, but I also want to shoot more in the middle range of the lens. So I prefer to shoot at f8 or somewhere around there because that's the sweet spot of the lens. And maybe you guys know this, maybe you don't, but every lens has a sweet spot. So let's say your lens goes from 4.5 to f22. There's a way to go through and test that and find out what's the best aperture range. So generally speaking, just as a wild guess, it's going to generally be f8 to f11, f14. So that's where you want to be if you're looking for the sharpest image. So anyway, that's why I made the change of the lens, the aperture, instead of changing the shutter speed or the ISO. I hope that makes sense. So if you guys have any questions on that, just ask. Okay, so shutter speed, again, kind of reiterate, you want to have that shutter speed is not super fast. You don't need it at 8,000 or anything crazy like that, but you don't want to be at too low, down at 30th of a second or 60th of a second if you can help it. Even though on a tripod you may be pretty good, you want it at a reasonable range, so that if you do have to trigger the camera with the shutter, you don't have a shutter release cable or a timer, you're not going to get any vibration. So if you can keep it around 800 or something like that, excuse me, then that's a great place to be. So anyway, fastest shutter speed. The ISO, if you needed to go up with the ISO, I would go up with the ISO. I was shooting at 250, but you could have just as easily shot at 400, 640, and that would have been fine easily. Probably up to 1600, depending on the camera. Okay, there's ISO. That's what I'm talking about. So you can, if you need to raise the ISO. So ideally what you're trying to do, let me go back and review this one more time. Ideally what you're trying to do is you're trying to put the camera in its best possible settings. You don't just want to do willy-nilly, because this is kind of critical, because you want the sharpest possible image you can get, because you got a lot of detail. You're shooting an object that's far away, and chances are you're not going to have a really long lens, and so you're going to have to crop the image, zoom in on it with your even after your full focal length. So you want as sharp as possible. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep everything in at its optimum. Aperture should be in the middle range, f8 to f14. Shutter speed should be somewhere around 250, 500th of a second if you can. And ISO should be, ISO doesn't need to be super low, but if you can, that's fine. But so try and keep everything optimized there in their optimum ranges, so you're not whacking one out. So you're not shooting at a super slow shutter speed at f32. Open that lens up a little bit and raise the shutter speed. Anyway, hope that makes some kind of sense. The thing I didn't talk about in the video was the focusing. I meant to do that. When you're focusing on something like the moon, it can sometimes be difficult. What you want, if you find your lens is hunting, in other words, what happens, because the moon may be so small in the frame, the camera may have trouble focusing on it, because most cameras use some kind of contrast to be able to focus on. So the first thing you can do is move the camera over and get your focus point on the edge of the moon, okay, where you got black on one side and then the edge of the moon on the other. See if that will focus. If you want to use autofocus, if that will then work. If it doesn't, sometimes it still hunts. If that won't work, then just go to manual focus and turn your focus ring to infinity. In other words, pretty much all the way to one side. That should work for you. But of course, you can focus it manually through the eyepiece or on the back of the screen, and that'll work. And the reason that works is because even no matter what the aperture is, at some point when an object is far enough away from the lens, you're going to be at infinity focusing anyway. So in other words, everything is going to be in focus at some point past a certain point in your camera and the lens, and so it really doesn't matter. You could be at you're going to be miles and miles away, so everything's going to be in focus. So now be careful though, because there are some lenses that will go past infinity, so it'll go super sharp and then it'll go out of focus, but most of them won't. And you'll notice on the lens there's that infinity symbol on there. You can kind of line it up with that, and that'll do the same thing. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about technique and some things you can do to kind of improve your images. So we talked quite a bit about technique and camera gear and all that kind of stuff, which is what I call the geeky part of the industry. But what you want to do is now kind of get creative with it. So let's talk a little bit about that, and I'll kind of show you some examples. So there's kind of a couple of things you can do. First, of course, the close-up. This is the most common. This is the one I see over and over again posted on Facebook. It's not very creative, but it's what people are trying to do to just get an image of the moon. And this is the biggest challenge. They're trying to get the exposure right. I get that. But my problem with this kind of photo is, when was it taken? Where was it taken? I mean, this could have been shot in 1975 on film for all we know. There's no context. And so it's okay. It's a great place to start. But if you want to get creative, then you kind of want some kind of context. You want some kind of foreground, something in the image that tells you where it is, or at least gives you some sense of where it is. It can be a tree branch. It can be clouds. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be a building or something that's even recognizable. But one of the things you can do is also just frame. In other words, if you have a tree branch or a window or a building or something, framing the moon so it gives it some context. So you're not just looking at this object, this in the sky, this bright object in the sky, that you see something that's it's being shot from the ground, and there's some context of where you are when you shot it. So that would be the other thing. The other thing you can do is composites. There's nothing wrong with that. You can take your moon shot we saw, the close-up, and you bring it into your photo editing software and do some, maybe come up with something unique like this. There are two kinds of composites that I believe that exist, or the ones that are the best, and that is that one is like this one, which is really a fantasy kind of image, obviously, and that's fine. And then there's the type that's really more, you don't know if it's a composite or not. In other words, if we go back here, this could be a composite for all we know. I don't think it is, but it could be. But it's realistic. And so I call this selling the fake. So it could be a fake, but the point is, it doesn't matter. It works. And it doesn't look artificial. Where we know this one's artificial. We know this is a composite. We know this is quote-unquote photoshopped. And that's fine. And then, of course, the other one is multiple exposures. Now, you can also do this as a composite, but it's much more interesting to be able to do it in camera. Now, this one is probably a composite, I think, because it was showing the different phases of the moon. But you could do, and unless it was an eclipse, of course, which it might have been. But you could also do something like this with just a single, not on a single evening, just by moving the camera, shooting, doing another one. A lot of cameras will allow you to do multiple exposure in camera. And so that's the other thing. Or, again, you could use a composite like this using multiple exposures. So that's another technique you could do. And then finally, the other one is to actually use the light of the moon to light the subject. So you can use it as its source. and there's some really cool shots you can do with that. It's a really neat technique to be able to do that. A little harder, of course, but that's, got to get it a little more advanced. So anyway, any questions? Come on, guys. You guys must have some questions on this thing. Appreciate you joining me tonight, by the way. And so Sue Ann says she saw this technique with the flashlights in national parks, and it's a great idea because, again, if you're trying to, your eyes adjusted to the dark, you don't want to turn on a big old bright light and then ruin that, and you can't see when that happens. So it's a good idea to have some kind of a light like that if you're going to be working outdoors. So anyway, anything else? You guys have any other questions here? Otherwise, I'm going to let you go eat your candy. So I don't. Oh, hey, Tank, how you doing? So, whoops. Tank says she's excited to try this. It's fun. It's there. I mean, it's not easy in some cases. Yeah. The other thing that you got to remember is that it's moving. I tried to do this during the winter one time with a long lens, like a 400 millimeter lens, and run out, set it up, run back inside. But that doesn't work because what happens is it's constantly moving. So the moon would move out of frame of the lens. So and I even had I was using a remote. I could actually see the back of the camera remotely. I guess nowadays you could do like on a phone. I was using this on an iPad, some special software. And it's kind of neat though to be able to try it. And again, if it's cloudy, that's the other thing. It won't work very well, but you want to try and find it. And now we're moving into winter, at least here on this part of the country, in the East Coast, so that it will be generally the sky will be a lot clearer. So anyway, let me remind you guys that if you've forgotten, that next week is the first Friday of the month. And we're doing photo reviews, of course. It's November 5th, I think. So love to have you submit your work if you're interested in having it reviewed. Again, it's not about whether I like the photo or not. It's really more feedback on the composition, technical, a little bit of technical merit, and artistic, how well it works and is telling a story. And any experience. It's doesn't matter what camera you're using. You can use a phone, use any DSLR or mirrorless camera, whatever you have, or film. And and it's all done anonymously, by the way. So I don't reveal who you are, only because I want you to submit your work. I don't want people to be embarrassed and go, I'm not good enough. That's no excuse. If you just want to submit your work anyway, no one's going to know who it was anyhow. So for all they know, it could be my work that sucks. So anyway, the idea is to encourage you really and to motivate you to do better and to give you tips to help your work, not for any other reason. Also, I would like, if you guys don't mind, if you found that some of this was beneficial, really love to see you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I know everybody asks you to do that, and there's a bell icon there, so you'll get notified. And I think right now we're at 99 subscribers. I'd love to hit 100. I don't know why. It's just kind of a magic number. So if you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel, it'd be great for you to do that. I appreciate it. And so anyhow, that's enough of that. Let's see. I think that's about it for this week. And did I forget anything, Sue Ann? Anything else going on? Yes, and you're right, Tank. Tank says that there's a lot of apps. I keep hitting the wrong darn button. There's a lot of apps for doing golden hour. A friend of mine, Donna Johnson, who's an amazing photographer in her own right, has, in fact, she uses that same app, the Photographer's Ephemeris. And I didn't know that, but she has the add-on to it. I guess it's a subscription. And it lets her determine what the color of the sky is going to be. So if you're looking for a place, deep sunsets, you know, pretty sunsets, it'll actually show you on the map where the sky will be a certain color or how deep it will be, which is pretty amazing in my opinion. And so she uses that because she likes to photograph barns and with these really neat skylines, you know, dramatic skies. And so that's what she uses it for. I use it, like I said, mainly for predicting where the sun is going to be on most shots. So anyway, and what's Tank saying here? She's saying, what about story prompts for one of the photos reviews? That would be interesting. What do you mean story prompts for one? Oh, like have me give you some. I mean, believe me, I got a whole list of topics I could give you guys as is that what you're talking about? As a story, as when you say story prompts, or so like in other words, shoot something to this subject. I can certainly do that. I've got a whole list of things I'm just holding on to for you guys that are enrolling in the Photo Mentor Academy course, and I haven't been giving them out, but I'd be glad to start some of those for you guys. So yeah, okay, cool. It's a great idea. All right, we will do that then. You ask and you shall receive. And Allie likes the idea too. Okay, cool. All right, we'll work on that. We'll start simple, something that's not too complicated. You know, I tell you, it's also an excellent way to improve your photography. So in other words, if I told you guys, okay, next week I want you to submit photos based on blue, or that's a little too easy, more of an emotion like sadness or something like that, you know, fluidity. You know, there's a lot of ways you could say that's pure water. It could be something, but anyway, there's a lot. If you photograph things that are, or try to photograph things that are intangible, that are feelings or emotions, it can be really difficult. But it's a great skill to have, and definitely something that will improve your photography. So I'll come up with something for you guys, and if you want, I will try and do that in the next day or two. So if you want to do some submission on something like that for next week, we can do that. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, I love it. Great idea. So let's see, I think that's it. Hey, listen, I enjoyed it. Thanks. I hope you guys found this useful. Thought it was going to take longer to go through this, but I guess it didn't. And next week, again, November 5th, is photo reviews, and I think the week after that, we're going to start doing some interviews with some notorieties in the industry, some friends of mine that I know that I think you guys will enjoy as well. So anyway, you guys have a great weekend, and if you're into Halloween, enjoy that, and see you next week.